when Fox News put up a graphic memorializing Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg when she hadn't passed away yet? Well, they make all sorts of really terrible mistakes, including one over the weekend that looked like this.
Cutting payments, aid payments to El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras over the fact that those countries have been unable to contain the flood of migrants heading through Mexico to our southern border. So yesterday we talked about potentially shutting down the southern border. 2 days ago, excuse me, no, that's yesterday. The weekend is just 2 days.
The weekend's just 2 days. Okay, so you might have missed this if you're listening to the podcast version of the show, but the lower third in that story said 3 Mexican countries, okay? Trump cuts US aid to 3 Mexican countries.
It almost reminds me of
the dumbest people on earth?
Yes, well, including the people who work there. Judah Friedlander's whole routine about America is the best country in the United States. Like MAGA guys might take that literally, right? And so they're like, oh yeah, that'll show those Mexican countries.
Well, it also-
Did the right wing even notice? I don't know that anybody watching Fox News was like, oh, that's funny. Or if they were like, oh yeah, that makes sense.
Well, I mean, members of the right wing will accuse people of speaking Mexican. I know you've heard that before.
Oh, a million times,
yeah. So anyway, Fox did apologize for that giant error, and the statement that they released said, we apologize for the error, it never should have happened. Okay, great. So with that said though, the segment did have to do with a pretty big news story, and it does have to do with cutting aid to Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, something that Trump is pushing for, and it could be very counterproductive if he wants to stop the flow of migrants seeking asylum here in the States. Here is Trump talking about cutting off aid.
We stopped payment to Honduras, to Guatemala, and to El Salvador. We were paying them tremendous amounts of money, and we're not paying them anymore because they haven't done a thing for us. They set up these caravans. In many cases, they put their worst people in the caravan. They're not gonna put their best in. They get rid of their problems, and they march up here, and they're coming into their country. We're not letting them in our country.
So notice Marco Rubio in the background. He knows what Donald Trump is saying is completely wrong. It's a lie. It doesn't make any sense, but he sits there like a good boy and does not object. Later, he will claim, oh, I wasn't on board for that stuff. But there he is, totally on board. I don't see him jumping up and down. So this is much more important than any graphic, okay? Obviously it's a screw up to write 3 Mexican countries. It's embarrassing, but the heart of this issue is much more important. So there's 2 layers to it. First of all, the Homeland Security Secretary, Kristen Nielsen, had come out on Friday and said she just struck a deal with those 3 countries.
Yes, so let me give you the details on what she said. Here is her exact statement. She says this week, and again, this is before Trump had decided to cut foreign aid. This week, after many months of diplomatic negotiation, Secretary Nielsen signed a historic regional compact with representatives of the Northern Triangle. The countries agreed to work with the United States to combat human smuggling and trafficking, crack down on transnational criminals fueling the crisis, and strengthen border security to prevent irregular migration. The secretary also met with senior officials from the government of Mexico to discuss ways to quickly address the crisis and stem historic migration flows through Mexican territory while ensuring all individuals legitimately fleeing persecution receive appropriate humanitarian protection. So again, that was the statement released by DHS on Friday. And then over the weekend, you hear from Trump arguing that the foreign aid should be cut to these countries.
Because he doesn't check with anybody in his government. He's a buffoon who never does any homework. So he contradicts his Homeland Security chief immediately. And then they all have to scramble. Well, we just spent months working on this deal, and then Trump comes in and says, I don't want to give aid to those countries. I don't know what they're going to do with the deal. On a separate story, Axios is reporting that the people who worked on Trump's budget are bracing for impact because Trump, of course, never read the budget. So he keeps coming out and contradicting what they said. Oh, they're going to cut the $300 million down to $30 million for the Great Lakes. Trump comes out in Michigan and goes, I love the Great Lakes. They're really deep. They're record deep. I want to make sure they get all the money they need. So then they have to put the $270 million extra back on top. He never read about the Special Olympics. He says, I like the Special Olympics. I want to put it back in. So they're all bracing for impact because the idiot didn't read a single thing in his own budget. So they're like, all right, we're just gonna wait until he reverses whatever he's gonna reverse and we're done with it. So now he reverses this, and I don't know what they're gonna do with the deal. And he's just maniacal. Now that gets to the second part. Those governments are not putting people in the caravans. They're not putting their worst people in. They're not having a conversation or a committee about who should we put in. Should we put the best that Honduras has in, or should we put the worst in? No, they're people who are desperate, who are joining the caravans to try to get to hope, freedom, and all of that. And look, you might say, I don't care how desperate they are. I don't want them in the country. That's a separate conversation.
Yes, and by the way,
I would disagree with you, but it's separate. That's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is, are those three countries, in your world, the three Mexican countries, making active decisions about who to put in the caravan? If you believe that they are, you're a maniac and deeply unintelligent, just like President Trump.
And for those who do not want migrants coming into the United States, understand that cutting foreign aid to these countries actually is counterproductive, because the whole point, and this was something, if you can recall, Cenk, we gave the Trump administration credit for previously, because it was reported, and it did not get a lot of attention, that the Trump administration was actually working with these governments and increasing foreign aid to these governments in order to help them combat the very crime and violence that these migrants are fleeing and coming to the United States for. So again, this money would have helped to alleviate some of that violence, and maybe some of these migrants would remain in their countries as opposed to trying to come into the United States to seek asylum. And now what Trump is doing is counterproductive.
So let me add a piece of realpolitik here, which is mixed. The reality is we also give money to different countries partly to control them and say, hey, if you don't do the things that we want, we're gonna take this money away from you. And then we negotiate with them, as in this case, to be fair to Secretary Nielsen, she did. But then a dunderhead like Trump comes in and goes, I'm gonna take all the money away. That'll show him. And everybody in the government, the right wingers who wanna stop the caravans and who wanna stop undocumented immigrants from coming in, go, oh, for Christ's sake, the idiot blew it again. Has no idea what we've been working on and gave away our leverage so that we won't even be able to stop them.
So I have a question, and you strongly believe that Donald Trump is an idiot who never has a plan or a strategy.
Correct.
Right? And in most cases, I would agree with you, but I would argue that in this case, Trump doesn't want migrant caravans to stop coming. I would argue that Trump does not want people coming into the country to seek asylum, because the one thing that has worked for Trump politically is to demagogue and to fearmonger about these migrant caravans. If you help these countries combat the violence that these people are fleeing from, well, then you're gonna have fewer numbers of people trying to come in. You're gonna have less of the ability to fearmonger about them. And so I think that this might be part of his strategy to help him in the upcoming election.
No way. Not remotely possible. So if you say that might be the strategy of some of the people inside the Trump administration, I'd even be surprised at that, because they're almost all universally stupid. But look, there are some devious guys like John Bolton who are not stupid. Stephen Miller, questionable intelligence. So I don't think that that's an inconceivable strategy for someone in the Trump administration to have. But Trump himself, way too stupid. There's a brick inside his head. So remember, he's a conspiracy theorist, always has been, about everything. So I think that he genuinely believes that Honduras and Guatemala and maybe even other Mexican countries are actually physically are loading up criminals into the caravan and going, go get America, go get them, right? Because he's that stupid. Yes, I'm telling you, it's not like, oh, I got this. I'll say that they're packing in the worst when I know that's not the case. I know that those are just normal, innocent people, but it'll lead to more migrants and then that'll help. No way, no way. He's never thought past a single sentence in his life. Thanks for watching this free clip of the Young Turks. Don't forget to become a TYT member today. For more exclusive content, join now at tyt.com/join.